The day I walked back into Westbridge High School, nobody recognized me. But I recognized every single one of them. The cracked marble tiles in the entrance hall. The faded blue lockers. The trophy case that still displayed achievements from a decade ago. None of them mine. I stood there in a tailored charcoal suit, my shoes echoing softly against the floor that once felt like quicksand under my teenage feet. 10 years ago, I used to stand in this exact hallway while they laughed. Ethan Cole. That guy's not going anywhere. Failure. Waste of potential. And the worst one, the one that still rang in my ears like a scar that never healed. Some kids just aren't built for success. That one came from Vice Principal Harris. I was 16 when he said that. 16. Still trying to figure out algebra. Still trying to understand why my brain worked differently than everyone else's. Still trying to survive a home where the lights got shut off twice a month because my mom couldn't keep up with rent. But none of that mattered to them. To them, I was just the kid who didn't fit. I wasn't disruptive. I wasn't violent. I wasn't even lazy. I just couldn't learn the way they taught. And that made me inconvenient. I remember the day it all broke. It was sophomore year. Career day. Successful alumni came to speak about their futures. Lawyers, doctors, entrepreneurs. The gym was decorated with cheap banners that said "Dream Big." I sat in the bleachers wearing shoes with a hole in the sole. Principal Davenport stood on stage, smiling like he was proud of every student in the room. He wasn't proud of me. When the assembly ended, teachers pulled students aside to talk about college tracks. Mrs. Langley, my math teacher, flipped through my file with a sigh so heavy it felt rehearsed. "Ethan," she said gently, but not kindly, "have you considered vocational training? Something more realistic." Realistic. That word felt like a door slamming shut. Vice Principal Harris joined her. "Not everyone is meant for higher education," he said. "You need to accept your limitations early." Limitations. I remember the heat crawling up my neck. My fists clenched so tight my nails dug crescents into my palms. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask them if they'd ever tried studying while your stomach growled so loud it embarrassed you. If they'd ever tried focusing when eviction notices sat on your kitchen table. But instead, I nodded. Because that's what failures do. They nod. That same year, I failed Algebra 2. Then Chemistry. Then I stopped showing up. The school labeled me a dropout before I even officially withdrew. Teachers whispered when I walked past. Students smirked. My best friend Caleb stopped texting. And one afternoon, as I was cleaning out my locker, I heard it. 2 teachers talking behind me. "Some kids just don't have it. He'll be lucky if he's not flipping burgers by 25. They didn't lower their voices. They didn't have to. To them, I was already invisible. I dropped out 2 months later. No goodbye assembly. No guidance counselor meeting. Just a signature on a form and a silent walk out the front doors. I remember turning back once. The building looked enormous. Intimidating. Like it had one. But what they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I wasn't stupid. I just learned differently. I didn't understand abstract equations. But I understood patterns. I didn't memorize formulas. But I could take apart a broken laptop and rebuild it without instructions. And when I left school, I didn't go home. I went to the public library. Every day. For 6 months. I sat at the same computer terminal in the back corner. Old machine. Slow internet. Didn't matter. I started teaching myself coding. At first, it felt impossible. Error messages everywhere. Forums filled with people who sounded like they spoke another language. But unlike school, the internet didn't laugh when I failed. It just let me try again. And again. And again. By 18, I built my first freelance website for a small mechanic shop. They paid me $400. I remember staring at the bank app like it was a glitch. $400 for something I built with my brain. Not a test score. Not a report card. Just skill. That's when something shifted. Maybe I wasn't broken. Maybe I was just in the wrong system. Over the next few years, I didn't sleep much. While former classmates posted dorm photos and fraternity parties, I was debugging code at 3 a.m. in a one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint. By 21, I launched a small SaaS platform for small businesses. Nothing flashy, just a simple automation tool that saved local shops time and money. It grew. Slow at first. Then faster. Then investors started emailing. By 25, I had 30 employees. By 26, we expanded nationally. By 27, we crossed 8 figures in annual revenue. But the moment that mattered most wasn't the money, wasn't the headlines. It was the email. Subject line: confidential acquisition opportunity, Westbridge High School. I almost deleted it. But curiosity won. The private board that now owned the struggling school was looking to sell. Declining enrollment. Budget mismanagement. Outdated infrastructure. They needed a buyer. I stared at the name on the document. Westbridge High School. The building that told me I was nothing. The place that labeled me a failure. Was drowning. And for the first time in my life, I had the power. I leaned back in my office chair, staring at the skyline through glass walls. My reflection looked calm. But inside, 16-year-old Ethan was standing in that hallway again. Shoes with holes. Hands clenched. Listening to laughter. This time, I didn't nod. This time, I smiled. Because 10 years later, I wasn't walking back in as a student. I was walking back in as the new owner. And they had no idea yet. And trust me, the day they found out was the day everything changed. But before I signed those papers, something happened that almost made me walk away. And that's where this story really begins. Have you ever been underestimated so badly that it changed the direction of your entire life? The email sat open on my screen for 3 days. 3 full days. I handled multi-million-dollar contracts faster than that. I negotiated investor deals in under an hour. But this felt personal. Too personal. Westbridge High wasn't just a building. It was the place where my confidence died the first time. I told my CFO, Mark, to run the numbers anyway. Purely business, I said. He nodded, but I could tell he was confused. Because financially, it made no sense. The school was bleeding money. Enrollment had dropped by nearly 40% over 5 years. Outdated systems. Failing test scores. Negative press about administrative mismanagement. Irony tastes strange when you finally get to swallow it. I requested a full audit. As the reports came in, something unexpected surfaced. Vice Principal Harris. Still there. Promoted to acting principal 2 years ago after Davenport retired. Still shaping young minds. Still deciding who was limited. When I saw his name on the leadership roster, my jaw tightened. 10 years later, and he was still sitting in that office. The same office where he told a 16-year-old kid to accept his limitations. My assistant walked in that afternoon. Ethan, the board is asking if you're serious about this acquisition. They need an answer. Serious. I looked around my office. Glass walls. City skyline. Awards framed behind me. 37 employees depending on my leadership. The kid they called a failure built this. Alone. And suddenly, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about every kid sitting in those classrooms right now. Maybe there was another version of me in there. Quiet. Struggling. Misunderstood. Being told he wasn't enough. That thought hit harder than any insult ever did. So I scheduled a visit. Unannounced. I didn't tell them I was the potential buyer. I just told the board I wanted to observe operations. They agreed. When I stepped out of the black car in front of Westbridge High, my chest tightened in a way I didn't expect. The building looked smaller. Older. Paint peeling around the windows. The banners were faded. Excellence through discipline. I almost laughed. Inside, the front desk secretary looked up. Can I help you? Yes, I said calmly. I'm here for the operational walkthrough. She blinked, clearly not used to people in tailored suits walking into this place. One phone call later. Vice principal, sorry, acting principal, Harris came down the hallway. He was older now. Thinner hair. Deeper wrinkles. But the posture was the same. Chin slightly raised. Authority wrapped around him like a shield. He looked at me politely. Professional smile. No recognition. Good afternoon. I'm Daniel Harris. I extended my hand. Ethan Cole. His handshake was firm. Unfamiliar. And for a split second, I wondered if he'd feel it. The shift. The reversal. But he didn't. Shall we begin the tour? He asked. As we walked the halls, students moved past us. Some laughing. Some dragging their feet. Some staring at the floor. I saw myself in at least 5 of them. Harris spoke confidently about curriculum improvements and student accountability systems. Accountability. He stopped outside a classroom. Through the small window, I saw a boy sitting alone in the back. Head down. Teacher writing equations on the board. The boy wasn't taking notes. He was doodling mechanical sketches in the corner of his notebook. My chest tightened. Troublemaker? I asked casually. Harris glanced through the window. Unmotivated, he replied. Doesn't apply himself. We're considering alternative placement. Alternative placement. The same phrase they used for me. I felt heat creeping up my spine. But I kept my expression neutral. Have you evaluated different learning styles? I asked. Harris gave a thin smile. We maintain standards here. Students must adapt. Students must adapt. Not the system. Not the teachers. The kids. We continued walking. Trophy case still empty of anything recent. Budget cuts had eliminated most extracurricular programs. When we reached the administrative office, Harris gestured toward the principal's door. My office, he said. I stepped inside. Same layout. Different furniture. But the air felt identical. Heavy. Judgmental. He sat behind the desk. I remained standing. So, he said, folding his hands, what exactly is your interest in Westbridge? There it was. The moment. I could tell him right then. I could watch his face change. But I didn't. Instead, I asked, how do you measure potential? He looked slightly thrown off. Excuse me. How do you decide which student will succeed? He leaned back. Experience, he said. Data. Observation. And if your observation is wrong? He frowned. We rarely misjudge character. Character. Not ability. Character. I thought about the hole in my shoe at 16. Was that my character flaw? I nodded slowly. Interesting. The meeting ended politely. No drama. No reveal. As I walked back to my car, something unexpected happened. The boy from the classroom, the one doodling, was sitting alone on the front steps. Sketchbook open. Drawing a detailed blueprint of what looked like a motor engine. I stopped. That's impressive, I said. He looked up, startled. Then shrugged. Doesn't matter. They say I'm failing math anyway. The words hit like déjà vu. What's your name? I asked. Lucas. How old are you, Lucas? 16. 16. I sat beside him. When someone tells you you're bad at something, I said carefully, it doesn't mean you're bad at everything. He didn't respond. But he listened. And in that moment, the decision crystallized. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about correction. System correction. But don't get me wrong. There was still a part of me that wanted to see Harris's face when he found out. Not humiliation. Not cruelty. Just realization. Realization that he had been wrong. Deeply wrong. That night, I called the board. I'll acquire the school, I said. Silence. Then relief on the other end. But I added one condition. Full administrative restructuring rights. No exceptions. They hesitated. Then agreed. Contracts were drafted within days. Wire transfers initiated. Legal teams involved. The numbers were large. But to me, it felt symbolic. 10 years ago, I walked out of that building with nothing. Now I was walking back in holding the deed. The signing was scheduled for Friday. And Harris still had no idea. But here's the twist. 2 days before the official announcement, someone from inside the school found out who I was. And instead of welcoming the change, they tried to stop the sale. And what they did next made this personal all over again. If you had the chance to take control of the place that once broke you, would you choose revenge or redemption? The call came at 9:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was still in my office, reviewing the final acquisition draft when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Ethan Cole. A woman's voice asked, low and tense. Yes. You don't know me. My name is Claire Whitmore. I teach English at Westbridge. My grip tightened slightly around the phone. Okay. There was a pause. The kind where someone debates how much they should say. I found out you're the buyer, she said quietly. And you need to know something before Friday. The air in my office suddenly felt heavier. Go on. They're trying to stop the sale. My jaw locked. Who is they? Another pause. Daniel Harris and 2 board members who still have influence. They're claiming conflict of interest. They dug into your records. My records. Of course they did. And? I asked calmly. They're using your dropout history. They're telling the remaining trustees that giving ownership to a former failure would destroy the school's reputation. Former failure. 10 years later, and that word still had teeth. I stood up slowly and walked toward the glass window overlooking the city. The lights below shimmered. They're saying you're unstable. That you're trying to buy the school out of spite. A small, humorless laugh escaped me. Spite. If only they knew how much restraint I was showing. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Another pause. Because I was there 10 years ago. My heart skipped. What do you mean? I remember you. Silence wrapped around the line. You sat in the 3rd row by the window in my freshman literature class. You barely spoke. But when you wrote essays, they were different. Thoughtful. Layered. I told Harris you weren't stupid. I closed my eyes. I barely remembered her. But she remembered me. He said you lacked discipline, she continued. That intelligence without obedience was useless. My fingers pressed against the glass. Cold. Grounding. They're scared, she added softly. Of what? Of being exposed. That word landed differently. Not revenge. Exposure. Truth. Why stay? I asked her. If you know what they are. Her voice cracked just slightly. Because not every kid here is broken. Some just need someone to fight for them. Lucas flashed in my mind. 16. Sketching engines in the margins. Same age I was when they labeled me. Thank you for telling me, I said. Be careful, she whispered before hanging up. The next morning, my legal team confirmed it. Harris had submitted a formal objection to the board. His argument. Mr. Cole lacks the academic foundation and institutional understanding necessary to lead an educational institution. Academic foundation. I built a tech company from scratch. But because I failed Algebra 2, I was unqualified. I should have been furious. But something strange happened instead. I felt calm. Because this time, I wasn't 16. This time, I had leverage. I scheduled an emergency board meeting for Thursday morning. In person. At Westbridge. When I walked into the conference room the next day, the tension was thick enough to taste. 5 trustees sat around the table. And at the far end, Daniel Harris. He didn't smile this time. He knew. The chairman cleared his throat. Mr. Cole, there are concerns regarding your suitability. I raised a hand gently. Before we begin, I said evenly, I'd like to play something. My assistant connected the laptop to the screen. A slideshow appeared. First slide. Declining enrollment statistics. Second slide. Budget mismanagement breakdown. Third slide. Administrative salary increases over 5 years. Harris shifted in his seat. I continued speaking calmly. Over the last decade, Westbridge High has lost 40% of its students. Standardized test scores dropped 12%. Meanwhile, administrative compensation rose 22%. Silence. Now, I said, clicking to the next slide, let's talk about potential. The screen changed. Photos of successful entrepreneurs, engineers, developers, many without college degrees. Revenue figures appeared beside their names. I didn't highlight myself yet. I let the data speak first. Innovation, I said slowly, rarely comes from conformity. Harris leaned forward. This is irrelevant. Running a tech startup is not the same as educating children. I finally looked directly at him. No, I agreed. It's harder. The room went still. Because in business, if you misjudge potential, you lose money. In education, if you misjudge potential, you lose a life trajectory. His jaw tightened. I clicked again. Final slide. My company's logo. Revenue numbers. Growth chart. 37 employees. Scholarship fund donations. Community grants. And this, I said quietly, was built by a student you once described as limited. The air shifted. Harris's face drained of color. Recognition finally hit him. Ethan. Cole. He muttered. Yes. For the first time in 10 years. He looked uncertain. The chairman cleared his throat again. Mr. Cole has already transferred the initial acquisition funds, he said carefully. Unless there is evidence of misconduct, the sale proceeds tomorrow. Harris's composure cracked just slightly. You're making a mistake, he said to the board. This is emotional. I stepped closer to the table. No, I said evenly. Emotion would be walking away. This is correction. Silence. Long, heavy. The chairman nodded. The acquisition stands. Just like that. 10 years of dismissal dissolved in one sentence. But the real moment hadn't happened yet. Because the official announcement to staff was scheduled for Friday morning. All faculty required to attend, including Harris. And I requested one small addition to the agenda. A 5-minute personal address. They agreed. Friday came fast. I stood outside the auditorium doors, listening to the murmur of teachers inside. Some curious. Some irritated. Some nervous. Harris walked past me without speaking. No handshake this time. The doors opened. I stepped onto the stage. The same stage where Dream Big banners once hung above my head. Now the banner read, New Leadership Announcement. I looked out over the staff. Faces I recognized. Faces older. Some unchanged. Claire Whitmore sat in the third row. She gave a subtle nod. The board chairman introduced me formally. Please welcome the new owner of Westbridge High School, Mr. Ethan Cole. A ripple of confusion spread through the room. Some whispered. Some leaned forward. Harris sat frozen. I stepped to the microphone. Took a breath. And for a brief second, I was 16 again. Shoes with holes. Heart racing. But this time, my voice didn't shake. 10 years ago, I began slowly. I stood in this building as a student who was told he lacked potential. The room went silent. I failed classes. I struggled. And eventually, I left. Eyes widened. Whispers stopped. But I didn't fail because I was incapable, I continued. I failed because I didn't fit a system that refused to adapt. I let that hang. I'm not here for revenge. Harris finally looked up. I am here because there are students in this building right now who are being mislabeled. Lucas's face flashed in my mind. Effective immediately, I said calmly, Westbridge will implement alternative learning tracks, technical development labs, entrepreneurship programs, individual learning assessments. Murmurs again. Shock. Disbelief. Because potential, I said quietly, is not determined by convenience. The room erupted into cautious applause. Not everyone clapped. But enough did. And as I stepped back from the microphone, something shifted inside me. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't vengeance. It was closure. But the story doesn't end there. Because later that afternoon, Harris asked to meet me privately. And what he said behind that closed office door almost made everything more complicated than I expected. If the person who once crushed your confidence suddenly apologized when you gained power, would you forgive them? The door to the principal's office closed with a soft click. Same room. Same layout. Different power dynamic. 10 years ago, I sat in one of these chairs while Daniel Harris explained my limitations. Now he stood by the window while I remained near the desk. He didn't sit immediately. Neither did I. For a moment, the silence felt louder than anything we could say. Finally, he turned. "You've done well," he said carefully. "Not congratulations. Not apology. Just an observation." "I've worked hard," I replied evenly. He nodded. His shoulders seemed smaller than I remembered. "I never imagined," he started, then stopped. "Never imagined I'd amount to anything." I finished for him. His jaw tightened. "That's not what I was going to say." I raised an eyebrow slightly. He exhaled. Long. Measured. "I misjudged you." There it was. 4 words. 10 years late. The strange thing. It didn't feel as satisfying as I'd imagined. I had pictured this moment countless times. Him humbled. Me victorious. But standing there now, I didn't feel triumph. I felt distance. "Why?" I asked calmly. He blinked. "Why what? Why did you misjudge me?" That question unsettled him more than accusation would have. He sat down slowly. "I've worked in education for 30 years, he began. "Patterns exist. Students who struggle early tend to continue struggling. Statistics don't define individuals," I interrupted gently. He swallowed. "Perhaps. But institutions rely on probability." Institutions. There it was again. System over student. "You told me to accept my limitations," I said quietly. "Do you remember that?" He hesitated. I may have said something similar. Similar. The careful distancing of memory. "You said not everyone is built for success." His eyes dropped briefly. "I believed I was helping you prepare for reality." Reality. I walked to the bookshelf behind the desk. Ran my fingers lightly across the spines. "Reality," I said slowly, "is that your words almost became a self-fulfilling prophecy." He looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I believed you," I admitted. That surprised him. For a long time, I thought maybe I really was broken. The room felt smaller. More honest. "I wasn't angry when I dropped out," I continued. "I was ashamed." That word hung in the air. Shame. Harris shifted in his seat. "I never intended to cause harm." Intent. Such a comfortable shield. "Intent doesn't erase impact," I said calmly. Silence again. Thicker this time. He folded his hands together. "So what happens now?" he asked quietly. There was something new in his tone. Not authority. Not arrogance. Uncertainty. I leaned against the desk. "Now?" I repeated. "Yes." I studied him carefully. This wasn't the same man from 10 years ago. He looked tired. Cornered. Maybe even aware. "I'm conducting a full administrative review," I said evenly. "Performance metrics will shift. Teacher evaluations will include adaptability and individualized development strategies." He nodded slowly. "And me?" he asked. "Straight to it. You'll be evaluated like everyone else," I replied. A flicker of pride crossed his face. "As it should be." Interesting. For a brief second, I saw something human. Something stripped of ego. "Do you regret it?" I asked quietly. His eyes met mine. "Regret what?" "Labeling students before they've had the chance to become anything." His lips pressed together. He didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. "There are former students I think about sometimes. That wasn't an answer. But it was close. Does it keep you up at night? I asked. Another pause. Yes. The honesty surprised me. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But understanding. He wasn't a villain in his own mind. He believed in structure. Discipline. Standards. He just forgot that people aren't spreadsheets. Why did you try to block the sale? I asked. His eyes hardened slightly. Because I thought you were buying this building out of resentment. Was I? I asked quietly. He studied my face. Long. Careful. I don't think so, he admitted. I'm not here to destroy this place, I said. I'm here to fix what it broke. That landed. He leaned back in his chair. So where do I stand? Direct. I respected that. You stand at a crossroads, I replied calmly. You can adapt with the institution. Or you can step aside. He absorbed that. No immediate termination, he asked. No, I said. That surprised him. I don't believe in humiliation, I continued. I believe in accountability. The word hit differently now. Accountability. For the first time since I walked back into this building, I wasn't driven by the 16-year-old version of me. I was driven by the adult I became despite this place. But just as I thought the conversation was winding down, he said something that changed everything. There's something you should know, he said carefully. My posture stiffened slightly. What is it? He hesitated, then reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a thin manila folder. He slid it across the desk toward me. I looked down. My name was on the tab. Ethan Cole. Dated 10 years ago. My heartbeat slowed. This was submitted after you withdrew, he said quietly. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of internal evaluations, teacher notes, administrative comments. One page in particular stood out, highlighted in yellow. Student exhibits non-compliant tendencies. Low probability of academic success. Recommend removal to protect institutional metrics. Removal. To protect metrics. Not help the student. Protect the numbers. My fingers tightened around the paper. You were categorized, Harris continued, as a liability. Liability. The word echoed in my skull. 10 years ago, they didn't just think I would fail. They decided I was bad for their statistics. A problem to eliminate. The heat in my chest wasn't anger. It was clarity. Who authorized this? I asked quietly. Harris didn't answer immediately. Then he said it. Principal Davenport. My eyes lifted slowly. Retired Principal Davenport. The man who smiled on stage during career day. The man who preached dream big. He had signed off on labeling me expendable. And suddenly, this wasn't just about Harris anymore. There was a deeper rot in this building. And if that rot still influenced policy, then this acquisition wasn't just personal closure. It was a necessary purge. I closed the folder carefully. Thank you for showing me this, I said evenly. Harris looked surprised. You're not angry. I met his gaze. Oh, I am, I replied calmly. But not at you. For the first time since I walked into this office. He looked uneasy. Davenport still sits on the advisory board, he said quietly. There it was. The real obstacle. Retired. But not gone. Still shaping policy from behind the curtain. Still protecting metrics. Still deciding who gets written off. And if he learned I had seen this file, he wouldn't stay silent. I slipped the folder into my briefcase. Thank you for your honesty, I said. As I walked toward the door, Harris spoke again. Ethan. I stopped. If I had known then what I know now, I would have handled you differently. I turned slightly. But you didn't, I said softly. And that's the point. I left the office with the folder in my hand. And for the first time since returning to Westbridge, the story felt bigger than revenge. Bigger than apology. This was systemic. And if Davenport thought retirement protected him, he was about to learn something. Because I wasn't just the new owner. I was the one person he never expected to come back. And the next move was going to shake more than just a few administrative chairs. If you discovered someone quietly labeled you a liability years ago, would you confront them publicly, or dismantle their influence silently? I didn't sleep that night. The folder sat on my kitchen counter like a loaded weapon. Low probability of academic success. Recommend removal to protect institutional metrics. The words replayed in my head over and over. Removal. Like I was defective inventory. Not a kid. Not a human being. A liability. I poured a glass of water but didn't drink it. My reflection in the dark window looked calm. Too calm. 16-year-old Ethan would have stormed into that building and demanded answers. 27-year-old Ethan. He understood something more dangerous. Power isn't loud. It's strategic. The next morning, I called for a closed financial audit of all advisory board members connected to Westbridge, including retired Principal Robert Davenport. If Davenport still had influence, I needed to understand how deep it went. By noon, my legal team had already uncovered something interesting. Davenport wasn't just an advisor. He controlled a private educational consulting firm contracted by Westbridge. That firm received annual payments for performance optimization. Translation. He profited from the very metrics he pressured the school to protect. My jaw tightened. So when students like me were categorized as liabilities, it wasn't just philosophy. It was financial. Lower-performing students threatened funding models. Funding models fed his consulting firm. And his consulting firm paid him. Suddenly, my dropout wasn't just unfortunate. It was convenient. I scheduled a meeting. Not with the board. With Davenport himself. He agreed surprisingly quickly. Maybe curiosity got the better of him. Maybe arrogance. We met at a private country club outside the city. Of course we did. The place smelled like polished wood and generational wealth. He was already seated when I arrived. Grey hair. Perfect posture. Smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Mr. Cole," he said smoothly, standing to shake my hand. "I've heard quite a bit about you." I held his gaze. "I'm sure you have." We Saturday. Ordered coffee. He spoke first. "I must admit, your success is impressive." There was that word again. Impressive. Detached admiration. "Thank you," I replied evenly. He stirred his coffee slowly. "But I can't help wondering," he continued, "why invest in a struggling high school? There are far more profitable ventures available to someone of your capabilities." Capabilities. Interesting shift from liability. "I'm interested in impact," I said calmly. He smiled thinly. "Impact is expensive." I slid the manila folder across the table. His eyes flicked down. Recognition hit instantly. He didn't touch it. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "Your former acting principal believes in transparency." A flash of irritation crossed his face. "It's internal documentation," he said sharply. "It's evidence," I corrected gently. He leaned back. Composed again. "Students are assessed all the time," he said smoothly. "It's part of institutional responsibility." "To protect metrics?" I asked. His jaw tightened slightly. "You're oversimplifying." "Am I?" I opened the folder and tapped the highlighted line. "Recommend removal to protect institutional metrics." He exhaled slowly. "You were underperforming." "I was hungry," I replied quietly. That landed. He didn't respond immediately. "You think this is personal," he said finally. "I know it is," I replied. He studied me. "You've done well without us," he continued. "Why dig up old grievances?" "Because there are kids there right now who are being labeled the same way." But I didn't say that. Instead, I leaned forward. "Your consulting firm," I said calmly. "It benefits from improved performance data, correct?" His eyes sharpened. "That's irrelevant." "Is it?" Silence. He realized then. This wasn't a sentimental confrontation. This was leverage. You're suggesting impropriety, he said carefully. I'm suggesting conflict of interest, I replied. His fingers tightened around his coffee cup. For 10 years, I continued, students who threatened metrics were pushed out. Alternative placements. Withdrawals. Dropouts. That's standard practice in competitive institutions, he snapped. Competitive. Like it was a sport. They were children, I said softly. The softness carried more weight than anger would have. For the first time, he looked slightly unsettled. You're playing a dangerous game, he said. No, I replied evenly. I'm correcting one. He leaned back again. Cold now. So what exactly do you want? There it was. Negotiation mode. I want your consulting contract terminated, I said calmly. Effective immediately. His expression darkened. You don't have the authority to. I own the school, I interrupted gently. Silence. Thick. Heavy. And if I refuse? He asked. I held his gaze. Then I present this documentation to the remaining trustees, along with a formal review of financial conflicts. Publicly. He understood the implication. Investigation. Reputation damage. Legacy questioned. For a man like Davenport, legacy was everything. You would destroy the institution's image, he said quietly. No, I replied. I would destroy the illusion. We sat in silence for a long moment. He finally closed the folder. You've grown ruthless, he said. I shook my head slightly. I've grown aware. That hit harder. After a long pause, he spoke. You realize eliminating performance filters will lower rankings. I'm not eliminating standards, I said calmly. I'm eliminating bias disguised as efficiency. He studied me like he was trying to find the weak point. There wasn't one. Because this wasn't about ego anymore. It was about structural correction. Finally, he nodded once. I will resign from the advisory board, he said quietly. And terminate the consulting contract. Just like that. 10 years of hidden influence dissolved in one conversation. But before he stood to leave, he added something unexpected. You know, he said slowly, if you had applied yourself differently back then. I looked at him. He stopped mid-sentence. Because he saw it. The certainty. The calm. The quiet strength of someone who no longer needed validation. I applied myself just fine, I replied softly. Just not to your system. I stood. Left him sitting there with his untouched coffee. When I stepped outside into the afternoon sunlight, the air felt lighter. Not victorious. Not explosive. Just clean. That afternoon, I announced the termination of all external performance-based consulting contracts. Internal restructuring began immediately. New funding allocated to technical labs. Entrepreneurship programs approved. Teacher retraining workshops scheduled. And Lucas? I visited his classroom personally. Engineering lab opens next semester, I told him quietly. His eyes widened. For real? For real. He tried to hide his smile. Failed. That was the moment that mattered. Not Davenport's resignation. Not Harris's apology. This. A 16-year-old who wouldn't be labeled a liability. But just when I thought the hardest part was over, an anonymous email hit my inbox. Subject line. You think you've won. Attached. Scanned copies of disciplinary incidents from my sophomore year. Minor ones. But twisted. Manipulated. Someone was preparing to question my character publicly. And there were only a few people who still had access to those archives. The game wasn't over. It was escalating. And this time, it wasn't about stopping the sale. It was about destroying me. If someone tried to rewrite your past to protect their own reputation, would you expose them completely, or play an even smarter long game? The anonymous email sat open on my screen. Subject line. You think you've won. Attached were scanned disciplinary records from my sophomore year. One for insubordination. One for classroom disruption. One for defiance toward authority. I almost laughed. Insubordination. At 16, that meant asking why a formula worked instead of memorizing it. Disruption. That meant correcting a teacher's outdated software in computer lab. Defiance. That meant refusing to accept you're not built for success. But twisted out of context, those records could paint a picture, not of a struggling student, but of a problem. And if released publicly, headlines would read differently. Former dropout with troubled past buys school. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had labeled me a liability once. Now they were trying to repackage me as one. I didn't respond immediately, because reacting emotionally is what people expect. Instead, I asked one simple question. Who still had access to archived discipline files? The answer narrowed quickly. 3 names. 1 retired, 1 current administrator, and 1 long-term records coordinator. I didn't accuse anyone. I did something smarter. I scheduled a full transparency assembly. Parents invited. Staff required. Board present. Local press notified. If someone wanted to question my character publicly, I would make sure the public had the full story. The auditorium filled fast. Whispers everywhere. Speculation spreading. Daniel Harris sat near the front. Quiet. Observing. Claire Whitmore gave me a steady nod from the 3rd row. And in the back corner, Robert Davenport. He didn't sit center stage. He didn't speak. But he came. Curiosity. Fear. Control. I stepped to the microphone. Calm. Measured. I've received documentation regarding my student record from 10 years ago. I began. A ripple moved through the room. I want to address it directly. Short pause. Yes, I continued. I was written up for insubordination. Murmurs. Yes, I questioned authority. Silence deepened. And yes, I struggled. I let that settle. Then I changed the tone. What those reports don't show, I said quietly, is context. I motioned to the screen behind me. Slide 1 appeared. Attendance records showing gaps, aligned with documented utility shutoffs at my childhood address. Slide 2. Teacher notes acknowledging advanced technical aptitude. Slide 3. The internal performance memo categorizing me as a liability. Gasps. Real ones. Parents shifted in their seats. Staff members exchanged looks. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply presented facts. For years, I continued, students who threatened performance averages were quietly pushed out. Now the room was completely still. This isn't about me, I said. It's about systems that prioritize metrics over potential. My eyes moved briefly toward Davenport. He didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened. I was labeled a liability, I said softly. But here's the truth. Next slide. My company's growth chart. Scholarship programs launched last year. Employee mentorship initiatives. Revenue reinvested into community education. I wasn't a liability, I said calmly. I was an unrecognized asset. The room erupted into applause. Not polite applause. Not forced applause. Real applause. Parents stood. Some teachers did too. Harris remained seated, but he clapped. Slowly. Deliberately. And that was enough. Then I delivered the final blow, not with anger, but with reform. Effective immediately, I announced, Westbridge High will adopt a multipath academic model. Technical education. Entrepreneurship track. Adaptive learning assessments. Performance reviews based on student growth, not elimination. And finally, all disciplinary archives older than 5 years will be reviewed for bias labeling. That was the move. Because if someone had accessed my file maliciously, the audit would reveal it. And it did. Within a week, the records coordinator admitted to forwarding the files anonymously, under instruction. Instruction from who? Not Davenport. Not Harris. But a mid-level administrator trying to protect institutional stability. Fear-driven. Not malicious genius. Just someone terrified of losing control. I didn't fire her publicly. I terminated her contract quietly. Accountability, not humiliation. Davenport resigned fully from all advisory ties, publicly citing retirement clarity. Harris. He stayed. But he changed. Subtle at first. Then visible. He began attending teacher retraining sessions personally. He sat in on adaptive learning workshops. He even requested to review past evaluations, his own included. One afternoon, months later, he knocked on my office door. "I met with Lucas," he said. "And?" I asked. "He's building a prototype engine model in the new lab." I nodded. "He reminds me of someone," Harris added quietly. I looked at him. "Yes," I said. "He does." He hesitated. Then said something unexpected. "I was wrong about more than you." That wasn't an apology. It was evolution. And sometimes, that's more powerful. Enrollment numbers began rising within a year. Not because we lowered standards, but because we widened pathways. The narrative shifted. Westbridge was no longer known for discipline. It was known for transformation. And 10 years after walking out those doors ashamed, I stood in the same hallway during graduation. Lucas crossed the stage. Engineering scholarship secured. His mother crying in the front row. He looked at me briefly before accepting his diploma. Not like I saved him. Not like I rescued him. But like someone who finally had space to prove himself. That was the real revenge. Not crushing the people who underestimated me, but building a system where underestimation couldn't thrive. One evening, after the ceremony, I stood alone in the hallway again. The same marble tiles. The same trophy case. But now, new plaques filled the glass. Technical competitions. Startup awards. Community innovation grants. I caught my reflection in the glass. 16-year-old Ethan wasn't there anymore. And I realized something quietly powerful. They didn't ruin my life. They revealed my direction. The boy they labeled a failure didn't come back to destroy the school. He came back to rebuild it. And in doing so, he rewrote the definition of success inside those walls forever. End. If someone once decided your worth based on a single chapter of your life, would you prove them wrong quietly, or change the entire system so no one else gets written off?